All right, guys, in this video, what we're going to do is utilize the wxWidgets Windows interface to create that super cool application we've made over and over and over now.
Oh, yeah, the rotating cube.
That's right. First, you saw it in Glut. Then you saw it back in SDL. Then again, you saw it with tons of complex code for the Windows API. And now, yes, you're going to see it in wxWidgets.
Right, and all its object-oriented.
As I was about to say, because of the nature of wxWidgets, it's extremely object-oriented.
Yep.
We're going to be handling this just a little bit differently, and you've got to get on your object-oriented thinking caps, because all of the other applications we've written have basically been like C-style, straightforward, just a series of functions, one file. Yeah. Now we're going to split it up. We're going to have our header file and our main CPP file. And, we've now got classes to deal with, etc. Just, again, because of the nature of wxWidgets.
That's right.
Now, keep in mind one very important thing. We are assuming one of two things with this video, and that is, one, you have rather watched C++ VTM number 4, where we covered wxWidgets for several hours.
Right.
Or you just happen to be familiar with wxWidgets.
And either is fine.
That's right. So
we
shall now begin.
Yes. Let's go ahead and start a new project, file new project, and it's going to be a Win32 project, and we'll call this wxWidgets _demo.
wxWidgets demo.
Demo, that's right. And press OK on that, and of course, as we've done in the past, Windows Application, empty project. And click Finish on that, so we're going to create two files.
We're going to focus first on the header file.
Right, but we'll create both.
Yeah, we'll get the files in place.
Yeah. So our wxWidgets demo file. Copy the name for that. Dink. So we got one there. And our header file. There we go. So let's go ahead and start out with our header file. And there are a few things that we need created. 3 classes that need to be created. The first is going to be our application, where everything starts out. And that's going to be inherited from our WX app.
Right.
And then we have our GL frame, which is going to be inheriting from our WX frame. And then we have our main GL canvas, which is going to be inheriting from WXGL canvas.
Right.
Now, just so you know, the GL app is going to be creating a frame, which is our main window. And inside the frame, we're going to have our canvas, which is going to display to us all the OpenGL interface.
That's right.
The
Again,
cube and the rotating and
with
all
the
that.
exception of all the OpenGL stuff, we talked about frames and the app and everything back in VTM number 4.
That's right. So let's go ahead and get started by doing our typical, if not defined, GL canvas _h. Go ahead and define our GL canvas _h, just so that it only gets defined once. Just so this file is only included once. And then end that off with an endif. Now, the first thing is, of course, we need our WX header file.
WXH, yeah.
So let's include that guy.
Kind of important.
Yeah, kind of. And we also need our Windows.h. So let's go ahead and define that. So if define Win32, which
Actually, let's do this.
Yeah, okay.
Let's go ahead and open up your Bingo development down there.
Yeah,
and
sure.
let's go ahead and drag the SDL one in.
Very good idea.
Because we can just save a little bit of time here.
Yep. Let's go ahead and just copy all of this.
Yeah, all the way up to the lean and mean stuff.
And go into our header file and just paste all of this in to save a little bit of time.
Absolutely. Now we're set up, of course, for including the Windows.h. And if we happen to be doing cross-platform stuff, we're ready to support Apple and all in regards to OpenGL.
Right, which header files it includes.
Yeah, with Linux, we're all set up good.
Yep.
So we're ready to go.
All right, and we're also going to need our GL canvas. So let's go ahead and implement our canvas header file. Because by default, the WX header file does not include our GL canvas. Because it's not typically used in a lot of applications. So we're just going to throw that in here, kind of necessary. So with that, let's go ahead and implement our main application. In fact, let me just kind of, to keep this organized a little bit, put that up.
Let's do one more thing.
Yeah,
Jump back over to the SDL demo real quick and go ahead and copy the window width and height, because we're going to need
I actually copied that already.
Oh, did we? Wow, you are so fast.
Oh, yeah.
Or I just don't pay attention. Okay,
So let's go ahead and define our application. So that's going to be our GL app. And like I said, we're going to inherit from our WX app.
Right.
And remember, this is just the definition. So we're not going to be implementing the functions just yet. But all we need is an onInit call. OnInit. I can do it. And something like that. We're also going to need, so that's all it is for the application.
So now we're going to need GL frame.
That's right. So let's go ahead and do our app GL frame.
From wxFrame.
From wxFrame. So we're inheriting from wxFrame. And let's first define our constructor, which is a very important thing to define. So the constructor typically has a few things that it needs. It needs a parent. What kind of title do we want for our window? Because this, remember, is the main window. Where do we want to put it on the screen? So we pass it a position. Let me just jump this down.
Yeah.
I'm running out of space here. What size do we want the window to be? And finally, what style do we want? And let's just go ahead and... Oh, wait. And we'll just give it a default of wx default frame style. And let's go ahead and create a private variable. Now remember, our frame needs to point to our GL canvas.
Right.
So let me go ahead and define our GL canvas, but we haven't defined this just yet.
Meaning this is going to cause a problem.
This is going to cause a problem because at this point, we're going to define our GL canvas down here. So like we're going to do a GL canvas.
And from public wxGL canvas.
Exactly. So our GL canvas, and that's all fine and dandy.
But now we're going to need to tell it that, trust in us.
Trust in us, it does exist. Exactly, because when the compiler is going through this, it's going to go from top to bottom.
That's right.
So it's going to reach here, compile this just fine, get to the frame and say, okay, and then hit this and go,
no.
I have no idea what GL canvas is because it's never seen that before.
It's real simple how we can do this. Basically, we can just say class GL canvas right before, just like such.
Which simply predefines it and says, okay, this name is a valid name.
That's right.
And then it's at this point that we actually define it. So at this point, we're going to, again, declare it as public, and we have our constructor, of course. So our constructor, and of course we're going to need our parent, just like before. The title. Fingers getting tired.
There has been much typing today.
Yes, there has. But that's okay. I don't mind. And finally, our style. I'm doing this a little bit wrong. I'm kind of...
Jumping around a little bit.
Sorry about that. We're going to have... We don't need... I totally just... started typing, completely forgot what I was doing. For our GL canvas, we do not need a title because it's simply a canvas. It doesn't need a string. But instead, we need
an ID.
We do need an ID because this is going to be held inside, and if we need to reference it, it needs to have an ID. We'll give it a default value of ID any.
Yeah.
Which is simply -1. For our position, let's give that a default value as well of wx default position.
Looking better.
Yeah. It makes more sense now. And our default size for our size. And finally, a style. We can just give this a style of 0. And we can give this a name, but we can give it a default name because it's not as important as a title for a frame. So we'll give this a title of GL Canvas. And for those of you that aren't familiar, this _T is simply a macro that allows for a little bit of cross-platform, if you will, that allows us to have different kinds of builds for it, for wxWidgets. So no matter what kind of method you use, it will work. So yeah. So also we'll need our destructor. So let's do our GL canvas. So this is our destructor. And remember we had in all the previous demos our SDL demo.
5 different functions.
We have 5 different functions, exactly. We have our display, draw, and all this stuff. So let's go ahead and copy these headers, if you will, so that we can put them in here. Let's start from the top and just work our way down. So let me just jump back and forth here.
Yeah, we'll need them up in a second.
Yeah. And again, we're using classes here, so we need to first define them and then actually do the source for them, write the source for them, which will be in our CPP file. And let's go ahead and throw some semicolons in the end here. Not there. And so those are the main functions for that. Let me actually write a comment here. Main OpenGL calls. Functions, excuse me. There. Just to kind of segment it off. And now we need to write our event handlers. So event handlers.
So what kind of events do we need to take care of?
Right, exactly. And there are quite a few.
No, actually, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad. The main ones are the on key down and on key up, which we have discussed in the other ones.
So that we can take care of the rotation of the queue.
Exactly. And we also have an on idle. Now, this is kind of something that we haven't done in the past, but basically what it is anytime the program is not doing anything, so we're just kind of the program is just idling around, we want to go ahead and update the screen so that we can get a constant refresh.
FPS.
That's right. We want a constant FPS, and we want to be able to have, like if we're having animation, we want smooth animations.
That's right.
So it's always doing something. So we're going to have an onIdle function, event, So avoid onIdle, wxIdle event.
Of course, an on paint would also be quite handy.
Right, because whenever the window is not
partially
obscured, or
exactly.
anytime we call refresh, we need on paint to actually do something. In this case, call our draw scene function. So we have our wxPaint event, calling event. And this one's also something that we haven't seen in the past, and that's going to be an on-erase background. By default, wxWidgets will erase the background for us if something happens, it gets covered or whatever. But in this case, we're handling all the drawing. We don't want wxWidgets to start erasing our background for us, because that'll just cause flickering.
Right.
And we don't want that. So inside the actual definition for our erase background, we're not going to be doing anything. It's going to be an empty function. But that just prevents wxWidgets from going in and actually doing erasing. So this is going to be an erase event. And, of course, we're going to have our on key down and on key up. And both of these are past key events. So on key up.
And, of course, probably the most important, the on timer.
Yep. Which is very similar to in our glut demonstration where we had a timer that is constantly called. Exact same idea. We want it to be called every millisecond and it to update the screen.
That's right.
And another thing is, we have the on idle, so you may be wondering, why would we need an on timer as well? Well, if you have a really slow computer and it's doing a lot of processing, you don't want it to just rely on the on idle, because if it's a really slow computer, that idle function may never be called. And this is really, really important, because an on timer, it says it has to get processed. An on idle event may never happen. An on-timer event has to happen at some point.
That's right.
So this prevents anything from your screen from just staying non-steady. So let's go ahead and just complete this guy. So it's going to be a timer event. And now we need to declare some private variables. First is something that holds the current state of every key.
Just like we've done in all the other applications, except it's going to be
500 now, because
a
little bit larger, because the range of keys are a little bit more. Before it was just to 256 because it was the simple ASCII table.
That's right.
Now we have a much larger range, so we're going to set that to 500. We also need to have our float, cube, rotate, x, and y. Let me just tab this in a little bit just to make it a little bit cleaner. Cube, rotate, x, and our cube, rotate, y. We'll also have an initialized Boolean that says whether or not we've already called the initGL function. Because we only need to call it once, but we need to make sure that, we keep track of that. And finally, we have our wxTimer class that...
By the way, in regards to the initialize, I just want to let them know they're going to see why that's important in a few minutes, because there is a reason that we need to keep track of it.
And finally, this is something that, if you're not familiar with wxWidgets, it's going to seem quite strange, but it's not really that difficult at all. Basically, it's a macro that declares the necessary functions inside of our header file that allow us to say which ones we want to handle. And I think this will be clear in just 1 second when we go back over into the CPP file. So let me just clean that up a bit, and that's basically our header file.
Yeah, very nice.
So let's go into our CPP file and start writing some actual code. First thing is, we of course need to include the header file that we've just written. So our wxWidgets demo.h. And we need to implement our app, and this is another macro that allows all the main functions, like the int main that we've been creating before, or the win main. It implements the main application so the wxWidgets can take control of our application and start handling all the events necessary.
Right. And
of course, what we're passing it is our main application, which we define at the very top here. If we go to the top, we define our GL app, which is inheriting from wxApp. And of course, we need to implement this onInit function. So, let me copy that. Come over in here. and just implement it. So we have our GL app. Don't forget this. And inside of here, all we need to do is create our actual frame, the frame that we define in the header file. So let's create a frame pointer, and let's create this guy. So GL frame parent, it's going to be null because we're the top level window. Title, we'll just pass it OpenGL Demo, and just to be consistent, we can pass it the macro. And WX default position, and WX size. Again, before we've always been managing it with window width and window height, so we'll call window width and window height.
Just to stay consistent.
Consistency is everything. So, and then finally, after we've created it, simply show it. And there we have it. And we'll just return true, saying that our application was successful.
Nice.
So with that, we need to start actually implementing our frame, which is going to be very, very simple. If we come over to our thing here, you'll notice we only have one thing to implement, which is our constructor. Let me just copy this and paste it just to make it a little bit easier for me. And let me delete this one default there. Default parameter there. And simply call WX frames constructor with a parent, whatever ID. In this case, we don't care what ID it is, so we'll just pass it a WX ID any. What title we want, the position, which is passed to us, the size and the style. And whatever we need to do inside. And let me just switch back over into the header file real quick so you can see that we have a GL canvas, just to remind you. So we need to create that inside of the constructor. So if we switch back over into here, let's go ahead and create that guy. So our canvas is going to equal a new GL canvas. And we're going to pass it the parent, as you can see here. So we have our parent. What ID do we want? In this case, we're the only one, so it doesn't really matter what ID we have. And actually, that's about it, because all the other ones we can just leave as default. In fact, we can even leave the ID any as default, but I'll just leave it there in case, for future editions, maybe.
Cool.
So at this point, we have everything. We have the application completely implemented. We have the frame completely implemented. Now if we switch back over into the header file, we need to implement all of GL Canvas. And this is where the core functionality starts to take place. So the first two things is the constructor and the destructor. So let me just copy these two guys over here. And delete all the default parameters for these. Just makes it a little bit easier. Better than having to retype everything, if you ask me.
And then remove off our semicolon and block her in.
Yep. So now let's call the default the constructor for GL Canvas. And let's see, what are we going to pass it? The parent. Remember, we have a rendering context. So what this is doing is we're passing it this null here. I could pass it another instance of a GL Canvas, and they'll basically share a rendering context. But in this case, since we're the only one, we'll simply pass it null. The ID of the window, the position, the size, and let's go ahead and pass the style, whatever is passed to us, and OR that with WX full repaint on resize. And basically what this is saying is anytime there's a resize event, simply redraw it all. And as I think I remember this as being only Windows specific. However, it can make a huge difference to make sure that everything on the screen is redrawn.
Right.
And finally, we pass it the name. And with that, that's almost everything. Now we need to actually start initializing all of our private variables inside of our GL Canvas class. So of course we have our cube, rotate, X, and Y. And we defaulted these to 45.0F and so like that. And we'll set initialize to false by default. And this will be initialized on the first paint event. And you'll see that in a minute. And let's also go ahead and do a quick loop through all of the keys variable that we have 500. So
let's go ahead and initialize them.
Right, all to false because no keys are by default held down. So keys I equals false. And let's go ahead and create our timer. So let's create a new WX timer and pass it this, as well as an ID, so we can pass it WX ID any, as I did above. And now, before you can actually utilize a WX timer, you need to actually start it, and you simply do that by calling its start member function and passing it the number of milliseconds between calls.
Just like all the way back in CLUT.
Yep, exactly like CLUT, except for the fact that after you call start, it will keep on going until you stop it. Unlike glut, where once you call it once, you have to restart it immediately.
Right.
And then let's go ahead and do the destructor, which is as simple as an empty function, just here in case you need to do something with it. And with that, we can start throwing in all the ones from our SDL demo.
Mm-hmm.
So all these guys right here, let me just copy them, paste them in. Or actually, let me just copy it directly from the demo. What am I thinking? Let me just take all of you here, ding ding, and copy it all the way down to check keys, right to there. Just paste this in, and of course we need to add GL Canvas to the beginning of each of these, so it knows it's a member of GL Canvas. So paste him in, display, draw scene, and finally our check keys. And if we look over here, there's only a few more we have left, our on idle, on paint, erase, and all of that good stuff. Let's go ahead and copy these guys, go to the very bottom of our source file, paste them in, and let's go ahead and implement these first before going up and modifying those.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and come up here, and again, copy this, make sure it realizes they're members of GL Canvas, and bingo. And just block these in. And what's really cool is there's not actually a whole lot that needs to be done in any of these functions. For the, let's see, for the first on idle and on paint, we pretty much only have to do one thing. And, well, for the on idle anyway, on idle and on timer are pretty much the same thing. We just need to call a refresh, which is going to force a redisplay. Mm-hmm. I believe it was in glut, we called glut post redisplay, which forced a refresh. Same idea here. On idle, anytime it's not doing anything, go ahead and refresh the screen. So we call a idle and then refresh. And then inside the on paint function, so this is called every time we need to refresh the screen. So the first thing we're going to do is see if there's any keys that need to be pressed, because this is essentially where the loop is going to be happening. This could be put elsewhere, but this is just where we decide to put it. So in the check keys, if check keys, go ahead and close the application. Just like we did in the past, we're going to get the parent because we're just a window. We're a small window. If we close ourselves, it's not going to really do anything. What we need to do is get our parent, which is a top-level window, close that, and that will essentially close the entire application. So we get the parent and call its close function and simply pass it true, and that's going to end the application. Then at this point, what we need to do is anytime you have an onPaint function, you need to declare a wxPaint DC with whatever you're trying to draw, in this case, our canvas. Otherwise, if you do not have this, you do not declare a DC and say, okay, I've recognized it as a DC, you can entirely lock your program and really unpredictable results. And then at this point, what we need to do is do a set current, which is essentially saying, okay, this is the current OpenGL context that we're modifying. And then what we need to do is do our draw scene. However, this is where I said that if it's not initialized, we need to go ahead and initialize OpenGL. So right after we do our set current, let's go ahead and say if we're not yet initialized, then go ahead and initGL. So call initGL, and we need the width and the height of the current window, so we do get size, and then the get width, and a get size with a get height. And there we it.
And we need to go ahead and set initialize.
Right, so it doesn't happen every time we need to repaint the screen. Initialized equal true. So there we have it. That's all there is to the onPaint function.
Okay.
And at this point, let's see. We have our onErase background, which we'll go ahead and say do nothing here to prevent flickering. And then our onKey down, all we need to do is set it up so that we modify the keys variable to set the current key as true or false, saying whether it's activated, depressed, or not depressed. So to get it, we simply create a local variable. Let's just call this key, and we'll call it event dot. Notice another thing to point out, and every single event that we're handling here, and the wxPaint event, we're passing event, an event here, but the class type that we're passed is different for every single one. And these essentially hold all the information we need about the current event that was passed.
About that particular event.
Exactly. So in this case, we have a very convenient member function called getKeyCode, which returns to us the key code of the key that was depressed. And then we can just say keys, key equals true. So to say that that one was actually depressed. And then the event.skip is saying, well, we've handled the message, so just go ahead and do whatever else you may need to do. And this is necessary if, for instance, you're handling tab characters or something like that. If you don't do this, then all that other functionality is gone. Because every time it comes in here, it says, okay, I've done this. Now when I call event.skip, that says, okay, do whatever you need to do behind the scenes. So it gives control back over to wxWidgets. And same goes for key up, except we set that to false. And on timer, this is probably the simplest part as well. Simply a refresh that forces a refresh, which calls the update paint function.
Right.
So with that should be everything, except we're going to get a whole lot of errors, linking errors, hopefully. So let's go ahead and compile this.
Did I completely miss the check keys section, or?
Oh, that's right. We totally haven't updated the functions yet.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and.
Because there's definitely a few things that need to change in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Not much, just a couple.
Well, there's just a few things that, as we've done.
Several of them, yeah.
Yeah, as we've done with all the other ones, we can kind of do it from the bottom up here.
And have we set up our event table yet?
I think so. Let me go back up to the. I guess we haven't.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Okay, I'll do that in 1 second. Let me go ahead and start with here and get the last time. And in this one, there is a nice little function called wxGetLocalTime in milliseconds, and this returns a very, very large number of milliseconds since like 19 something. Very, very large number. So let's just get the low 32 bits. So get low, and then we'll typecast that into a long, and that's the way we can get our time. So let me just copy this entire thing and paste that here as well. And for this, just like in every other single application we've had, just change that to WXK, and everything applies across. So there we have that.
Again, it's the whole point of doing the same application through different window interfaces. It's just showing you guys how the heart of the OpenGL functionality remains almost identical throughout each application.
That's right, and how easy it is to use whichever one you may want to use.
That's right.
So for here, again, this is a line that needs to be modified. All we need to do is change this over to swap buffers.
You're back up in your draw scene now.
Yep, now we're in draw scene. So we change that over to swap buffers. And that should all stay the same. This is going to change, so we need to do a get parent. Because remember, we're just a small little canvas inside. We are not the top level window. So we get the main parent.
And he's in display frames per second now.
Yep. And we need to set the title over to title. And end that off. And I think we also need to change last time to the whole. I could copy and paste it, but I'll just go ahead and retype it. So we have our wxGetLocalTime millis and a get low. And let me cast that to a long for good measure. And copy and paste this over this one right here. And these two functions remain the same. Now let's go ahead and, because I totally forgot to actually declare the event table.
Yeah, that's pretty important.
Yeah, if you don't have that, then none of this is going to work.
No.
You'll get a lot of errors. So right on top of the constructor for GL Canvas right here, let's declare our event table. So we start out with a macro called begin event table. And this macro takes two things, the class that we're trying to declare the events for, and then the base class of that one. So in this case, our class is GL Canvas, and the base class for that is wxGL Canvas. And to end it off, we have our end event table. And then inside of here is where we say which events we want to handle. So for the first one, let's say we have our event idle. And we want to call which function? We want to call our GL Canvas on idle.
And this is really where we're making all of our associations for when these particular events occur.
Which function call.
Yeah, it gets called.
And if you have this, but you don't have, if I switch over to the header file, declare event table, this won't work.
Right.
So the two things you need are the declare event table in the header file, and then a begin event table and end event table. And I totally forgot these two parentheses, so let me slap those in.
And again, we went over this really carefully in C++ VTM4.
Right. I just thought I'd cover it just a little bit.
Absolutely.
So we also need to handle the paint event. So we have our GL canvas on paint. And we also have our erase background. Erase background. I did that twice already. Amazing. GL canvas on erase background. And let's see, what else do we have? Our event key up and key down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting tired of typing that, so I'm going to copy and paste it. On key up. Isn't that what it's called?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And we have our EVT key down. On key down.
And then one last event, the event timer.
Yep. This one's a very important one, so let's go ahead and type this guy in. So our timer. And what ID does the timer have? Remember, we just gave it an ID any. And we also need to pass it the function. So for some of these events, you may want to, let me switch that over to this guy. So for some of these, say the event timer, what if you have multiple timers and you want each timer to be directed to a different function? Well, in that case, I could say, all right, one timer has ID, say, 500, and then another one has ID 501. Well, I would have two items in this table, one with 500 here and one with 501, and they could each call different ones.
Right.
So with that should be everything. But if I go ahead and compile, you'll notice the first error I got was cannot open include file wxSetup.h. So let me go ahead and switch over to the Bingo development folder here, switch over to our files area where we install wxWidgets. And if I go in here, I mentioned in the installation, we have our library here. And inside of here, this is where our setup.h is. So if I go up, I need to add this into the project settings for this application. So if I go into under configuration properties, C++, under general, additional include directories, I'm going to slap this guy in here, press OK, and then we should start getting the errors that I'm looking for.
The real errors.
The real errors. All right, excellent. Has no constructor. Class has no constructor. GL canvas class has no constructor. Let's see. One error that I wasn't expecting.
This is where... Okay. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Let me go ahead and go up to here and make sure that everything makes sense. GL canvas has no constructors. Actually, it does. It has this one right here, GL canvas. And we're passing it parent. Let me go ahead and get rid of that to make sure that I'm not doing anything totally crazy here. Let me go ahead and try to recompile that. All right, let me just make sure I'm not doing anything totally stupid here. So we're including the wxWidgets demo.h, and then we have our begin canvas, GL canvas, wx canvas. Let me switch over to here. And I totally forgot my semicolon here.
It's the fun in troubleshooting.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see. What else now?
Let's see here. Lots of little errors everywhere. Let me make sure that I'm not doing anything totally retarded here in the definition for my declaring my event table. Let's see. Troubleshooting is always fun, but it can be a headache sometimes. Our GL canvas. Make sure we have the same name here. That is right. All right, wxGL canvas. That should be right. Alright, so I'm looking around here. Okay, here's the problem. This is something that's really, really easy to mess up. If you see here, we have our definition for our class, semicolon. Definition for our class, semicolon. Definition for our class, no semicolon. This is something that is bad. So let's go ahead and put our semicolon in there.
Right, now what do we get?
A lot less errors, hopefully.
We'll see.
All right. See, that's the kind of errors I like. Small number of errors. Let's double-click on this guy. All right, we do need to typecast this, because remember I said this is looking for a GL canvas, but in this case we don't need to pass any. But we need to go ahead and typecast it so that it knows what kind of no we're looking for, if you will.
Right.
So if we try to compile that again, well, actually I could have fixed those 2 errors a second ago, but go ahead and recompile. Okay. This is supposed to be initialized, and this one's supposed to be wxk. All right, so now the true errors that I was expecting to get were linking errors. So we should get lots and lots of linking errors. Excellent. Of course, we're going to need our wxWidgets library, which we compiled in the last lesson. We're also going to need our OpenGL ones and a few other ones that wxWidgets requires. So if we go into our project properties here, let's go into our linker, our input. Let's throw some of these guys in here. So our OpenGL32.lib, which we defined for many of the other ones already. And then we're going to have our wxMSWD.lib. And then our RPCRT4.lib, which is required, and our common controls library, because we did compile it to allow us to use the common controls as well. So let's go ahead and press OK on that. And there's going to be one other error, should be. All right, so we have our libcd, and this is because we compiled wxWidgets library in a different fashion. In the code generation, we're currently using single-threaded. When we compiled wxWidgets, we used a multi-threaded debug DLL. Now, we can change this to be static or whichever one you want, but you have to make sure that both are compatible. Otherwise, you're going to have redundancies when we try to compile. So switch this over to multi-threaded debug DLL. Press OK to that. Now recompile. And if all goes well, we should get less errors.
Or no errors.
No errors are good. So let's go ahead and run this guy and see what we get. So look at this. Here we have our almighty cube. And it even works with rotation and everything.
All right.
Sweet. So there we have it.
It's constantly refreshing, as you guys can see, with our title being constantly updated with the frames per second.
Right. So everything is working as it should. And if I press escape, it actually exits. So everything is as it should be.
Very, very nice. Just some very simple, standard type bugs that we introduced ourselves.
Yep.
But
actually, there's one other thing I do want to throw in here before I forget, because I almost did. Go into our property settings, and if we go into the preprocessor, we currently have Win32, Debug, and Windows. There are just a few others that typically are thrown in for wxWidgets application. So I'm going to go ahead and throw these in. Of course, they don't influence the way it works. However, when it's compiling certain files, or if you need to see whether or not wxWidgets is compiled as a debug application, you may want to throw these in. So we have things like the MWX-MSW, which says that, okay, we're currently compiling a wxWidgets application, and we have our WX debug, which specifies that it's a debug application for wxWidgets. And then let's go ahead and just press OK on that. So basically, that just wraps it all up. Just kind of make sure that you understand.
Neat package.
Oh, yeah.
So with that, that's going to wrap up this video on how to use the wxWidgets Windows interface to create an OpenGL application. Thanks a lot, guys.